Welcome to Broadband Breakfast live online for Wednesday, September 7th, 2022. Happy post-Labor Day and the beginning of the non-summer season, although technically, of course, it is still summer until September 21st or 22nd. I can never figure out which day summer officially ends at. But we are so excited to welcome our special guest and other guests for our program today. Today, of course, we're going to be talking about the Middle Mile Grant Program of the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, And NTIA has been extremely busy, as you've probably heard, on another little broadband infrastructure program, the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program. That's the $42.5 billion program that is in some ways a new thing, a new program. There's a lot of moving parts to it. We at Broadband Breakfast have been following it extremely closely over the past year and more, since the Senate version first passed in August. And then, of course, the House passed it November 6th of last year. And there's been obviously lots and lots of attention and focus on the BEAD last mile program. Today, we're not going to talk about BEAD, at least not insofar as it's directly relevant. We're going to talk about the Middle Mile program. Now, the Middle Mile program is a program that is merely $1 billion, which in normal times would be a big program for the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, but is not as big, obviously, by comparison. But it is, I guess, sneakily important. And that's why we are so happy that we are able to have the director of the Middle Mile program, Sarah Bleau. I apologize, Blue. We'll let you correct me in a moment, Sarah. But we are so excited that she will be with us and give us a great perspective on the importance of this program, how it ties into the broader Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and the process, because deadlines are coming up in 3 weeks and 2 days. The September 30th immovable deadline will occur. So if you have last minute questions, you should be asking them of us, of course, but also of Sarah, because she has office hours practically twice a week. She's got these great office hours. We at Broadband Breakfast have been attending them. We reported on them, and I'll put the link in the chat here shortly, so you can see those reports and those links. But this is all by way of saying that we're so pleased that we can hear from a top official at NTIA about the Middle Mile program, and it's important. Before I turn it over to Sarah, I want to remind you that we at Broadband Breakfast believe in better broadband, better lives, and we do this through reporting and through convening, through events. We do reporting every business day on broadband infrastructure, broadband application, and also on big tech and the role that it plays in broadband policy and internet technology. But we also do these events every Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern time. Next week, the topic of our event will be how can cities take advantage of federal broadband funding? And the next week on September 21st, we'll be talking about broadband mapping and data. This is a perennial favorite at Broadband Breakfast. We are so excited for the encore performance, and we will be wrestling with the big questions surrounding broadband mapping and data. Also, I want to give a shout out and a thanks to all of the sponsors of Broadband Breakfast. We would not be able to do our programming every week without you, without your support. The sponsors are Utopia Fiber, Broadband.money, Google Fiber, Broadband Now, Lightbox, Ookla, Michael Baker International, Pinpoint Capital Advisors, Bitstream Communications, Inc., Positron Access, and the California Emerging Technology Fund. Thank you to each of our sponsors. Well, with that, I am going to turn the screen over to our honored guest. Thank you for being with us, Sarah. I will let you pronounce your last name and give you a chance to say a little bit about yourself and what brings you to this subject of the middle mile.
Thank you, Drew. It's a pleasure to be here with you and Mark. My name is Sarah Bleau. It's pronounced like the color.
Great.
And I'm particularly happy to be here. Mark mentioned, Drew mentioned that we've been doing these office hours. And so for the benefit of everybody else, here at NTIA, we have this middle mile grant program, and it's a competitive program, which means that you'll be submitting an application and you're competing with other people who are also submitting applications. And so I'm limited in how much I can comment on the merits of anybody's application in particular. However, we have been hosting these office hours because there are a ton of eligible entities who are interested in applying to the program. And unless you have a history of applying for federal grants, or if you've got a lot of lawyers, who understand what all of these notice of funding opportunity rules mean, it can be a little bit daunting and confusing. And so for that reason, in addition to the regular webinars that we host to talk about the various stages of the application, we've been hosting office hours, and those are Tuesdays and Thursdays. If you go to our website, internetforall.gov, then you'll see them listed, and go to the webinar tab. You'll be able to sign up for those meetings. We skipped this week because it was Labor Day week. And so that's why I'm particularly happy. Drew, thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk to everybody and do this form of an office hour. I'll speak at a high level about the program itself. It is only $1 billion, which, compared to the BEAD money sounds like nothing, but it is, number one, it's an extremely exciting opportunity. I think it's arguably one of the most important grant programs right now, because we're closing on it September 30th at 11:59 p.m. Eastern. We will not accept applications beyond that. Applications are due in our portal. I am aware that grants.gov has notified some people that there are shutdowns. That will not impact your application with our enabling middle mile program. Go to our internetforall.gov website and you can see exactly where you would click to apply for the program. But it's exciting because it's coming up. We're going to be making decisions. We're going to be making recommendations. When you read the notice of funding, there's a whole bunch of language in there about the various stages of review. There's initial, which checks for the completeness and eligibility, the thoroughness of the application. There's merit review, where your application is looked at by 3 independent merit reviewers, and they evaluate, and all of these rules are written into the notice of funding. So basically they're going to 60% of your score is going to go to project purpose beneficiaries. 40% is going to the fiscal sustainability, because we want to make sure that these are your tax dollars at work. NTIA is nothing but a steward of your tax dollars. And so it's the fiscal sustainability of the project of this application is really critical to us. Once we get beyond that merit, those applications who meet 2 of the 5 statutory criteria and do better than 80 on average go into programmatic. And so all that to say, once the programmatic review is completed and we have the applications that are selected for recommendation, we will begin making announcements. We will begin the rolling awards for this program. Will begin March 1st of next year. That's to say, thinking about middle mile in those terms, between now and March 1st, BEAD, we've got is a very exciting opportunity, but BEAD is right now, we're trying to figure out when the FCC provides its data location map, and we figure out how many unserved and underserved and all of the challenges are completed. And then finally, NTIA is going to tell every state and territory, here's how much money you're going to get. Now give us your plan. I hope that the timing of announcing the recommendations of the middle mile grant program will work with that timing of states and territories thinking about their 5-year plan, their initial plan, so they can take into account, I don't have to build from scratch. Here's a lot of good information that has been provided as a result of this middle mile program. Thank you, Drew, for giving me a few minutes to go over that.
No problem. And again, before we introduce our additional guest, I want to ask a little bit more, Sarah, about what is it? And again, I know most of the people who are watching us on, whether you're on Zoom or any of the other platforms, and we stream on multiple platforms on LinkedIn, on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. I'm sure most of the people watching this do know what middle mile means, but it's always helpful to define our terms. So what is the middle mile, and why is it different, or how is it different from the last mile that is the subject of the 42.5 billion? And, maybe you could also just speak a little bit about how the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act 10, 11 years ago was pretty much all middle mile. So tell us a little bit about that middle mile, last mile distinction, Sarah.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I'm sorry that I sometimes you get caught up and you're so used to looking at something day in and day out, and that you forget to take a step back and explain what it is that we're looking for. I'll be honest with you, I am not a lifetime federal person. I was in the industry working with fiber providers and non-fiber providers for a very long time. And to me, middle mile, I never used that term until I ran into the federal government. We always called it long haul, and what it was getting from it. Basically, the way that we describe middle mile in this notice of funding opportunity is, if you think of it, there's the internet backbone that's global, that, those of us who've been in the industry for a while, we call it tier one. These peering points, the NFL markets, this is like Chicago, Seattle, Tokyo, going all the way around to London and Rio and back up to DC and New York. This is a commercialized, high speed, like just petabits, terabits, huge amounts of capacity that the tier one ISPs, like, the old France Telecom, or the Telefonica, or AT&T, that large ISPs like that, they continue. We're not going to touch that. There's no federal government money that needs to go to that, because that's a commercial product. On the other hand, you've got what we call last mile, and last mile is the connection into your home, into your business. For those of us who've been building networks for a while, sometimes it's the lateral. It's often a very time-consuming, difficult, and can be very expensive piece of the puzzle. But the last mile is just that. It's that connection into your home or residence that brings the internet. Middle mile is kind of everything in between. Oftentimes it's something like I'm in Colorado. So if Denver is a tier one peering point, then a middle mile solution might be from Denver to Pagosa Springs, or to Durango, to some of these smaller tertiary markets where maybe there's not high-speed connectivity, or maybe it's not resilient already in place. So it's bringing the internet backbone, that high-speed commercial backbone, closer to communities, so then it can be handed off to last mile providers who will serve households and businesses. You mentioned the BTOP and the R money from 10, 11 years ago. That was middle mile also. The intent was to build out middle mile. One difference that I'll point out, though, is that with the BTOP money, and I wasn't here, so this is only my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but community anchor institutions were allowed to be built into with the BTOP money. What we're saying here with the enabling middle mile $1 billion that we have today is it does not serve households or community anchor institutions. I will also say that it gets a little bit, I would say, complex, the language, because we do ask you in the notice of funding, if you, number one, I'll say that we're tech agnostic. You tell us, you be the smart ones telling us how you're going to, what your proposal looks like. But if you do decide that you want to do fiber, then we ask that you've got a non-discriminatory interconnect policy in place, that you're going to provide open access, for example. And one of the other things that we ask if you are proposing fiber is that when this middle mile network passes within 1,000 feet of a community anchor institution, that you enable it. The language is something like, I'm probably going to mess this up because it's a little bit confusing, but you facilitate the interconnection facility of that community anchor institution. That's to say, we're not going to fund that lateral into the community anchor institution, but that you're building, if it's a splice point, an interconnect point, something like that. So there is that ability so that some other last mile provider could come in if the community anchor institution were interested in getting a gig up and down. That last mile provider could come in and interconnect. So thank you. That was a good question.
Well, let me ask one last question before we open it up. And we want to, again, encourage, as we always do, encourage all of your questions on Zoom or the other platforms. We have the capacity to receive them on whatever platform. So feel free to ask your questions. We're going to try to get as many as we can of our guest, Sarah Bleau. And I wanted to ask you, Sarah, what would you say are the top 3 questions that you've gotten in these 6 office hours that you've hosted thus far? You've done 6, you've got 6 more. Like what's on people's mind? What are those top 3 things that keep come up over and over and over again?
Well, I will say, and this is a freebie, a question that comes up quite often is, will there be an extension? And I won't even count that, Drew, to your 3,
good.
Because no, there will absolutely positively not be any extensions. These applications have to be in our application portal by the end of the day on September 30th. No extensions at all. I see that there's a lot of familiar faces and names here, and it's good to see everybody again. One of a big topic of conversation when we have these office hours, it's not necessarily me providing answers in so much as it is getting people together and sharing their questions, thoughts, ideas. What are the areas of concern? And one of them is the letter of credit. And I think that this is an important conversation for both the middle mile program as well as the BEAD program. It's something that we at NTIA are very much aware of. In the middle mile program, there's language, there are a couple of certifications that we require. We again, going back to the fact that these are your tax dollars and we need to be good stewards of your money. We need to make sure that the applications who are selected are financially, technically, managerial, operationally capable, that there are certifications, attestations from officer level employees to say, yes, I attest to this. And on the financial front, the FCC has got so much invaluable experience working on programs similar to this. And so, of course, we sat down with the FCC after the act passed, and to learn, what lessons did they pick up? What would they do again? What would they not do? And so you will see language in our middle mile notice of funding opportunity that we request a commitment from a bank with your application, whereby the bank is committing, if your application is selected for award, the bank will issue an irrevocable standby letter of credit, similar to the letter of credit which was required for the RDOF grant. That letter of credit is a conversation that we are having regularly, often, within a day here at NTIA. So I can say that. The another question,
number 2 and number 3,
yeah, another question that comes up a lot is there's a lot in the, like, for example, when you read the statute, there's no mention of climate resilience. When you read our notice of funding opportunity, you will see that it is required that you address climate resilience. So there's climate resilience, and then of course, on a different level, but still somewhat related for a lot of people, there's the Environmental and Historical Preservation Act, NEPA. And what does all of that mean? And we do ask for applicants to provide an environmental narrative and to send Google Earth, like KM's Google Earth images of the area where they're trying to build. And so we get a lot of questions about NEPA, and we get a lot of questions about climate resilience. I am happy to say, if you are interested in this stuff, next week on Tuesday, the 13th, I will be joined by one of our NEPA experts who's going to talk through the categorical exclusion checklist that we've alluded to, and so she can answer questions there. And then on the 22nd, it was actually NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, I think, who wrote our NOFO language on climate resilience. And when you read our the application, we ask you to use these NOAA tools. And so I'm happy to say that on the following Thursday, that's September 22nd, I will be joined in my office hour by individuals from NOAA who will be taking questions live that you might have about what are we looking for. We can't say what we're looking for, but they can enlighten us all. We can have a bigger conversation about the climate resilience narrative. That and you know what, Drew, finally, the last question that comes up quite a bit is with the middle mile program, we do require applicants, unless you are a tribal government native entity and you request a waiver of this, you are required to provide at least a 30% match. And that match can be in cash or an in-kind contribution. We did provide guidance not too long ago that for the in-kind contribution, we asked applicants to use fair market valuation. And I'll be honest, that means a lot of different things to a lot of people. So these are some conversations that we've been taking advantage of the office hours to have as a group, just to let people talk to one another, to know I'm not the only one who's wondering about this. Here are 10 others. So that's been very helpful in these office hours also.
Well, that was time very well spent to review just those high level 3 big points that keep coming up. Let's now open up our discussion a little bit more. We are very happy to have with us, in addition to Sarah, we have an additional guest that will be speaking right now, Mark Goldstein. He's the president of the International Research Center and has worked extensively, and I believe is the chairman of the Arizona Telecommunications and Information Council. And Mark, you have been a guest on Broadband Breakfast Live Online before. Welcome back. We were hoping we'd have another guest who's also in the middle mile space, but he had a change of plans flight-wise. So Mark, let's turn it over to you. What are some of your thoughts about this middle mile program as it stands right now? And what are you thinking as a potential applicant is going to be important as you consider your application over the next 25 days? Sorry, take that back, 23 days.
Countdown time, right? So thank you, Drew. And I did want to mention, I've known Drew since he was with the state of Illinois. We were both hanging out at Broadband Communities Conference in Austin. I had the contracts for Arizona and Utah to do the broadband data collection and cleansing and mapping back in those days. I've been a consultant for about 30 years now after an engineering career. Most of that's been in broadband IT and smart city, smart this and smart that. So I am here because I'm working on 3 parallel applications in 3 different states, all different time zones than each other and then from me. So literally from coast to coast. Struggling as anyone does with the mechanics and the specifics of a program like this. Okay. Now, NTIA has done
Mark, what do you do with all that background check?
Make sure that you're muted if you're not on the speaking list, okay? Apologies. Go ahead, Mark.
Sure. NTIA has done some streamlining from traditional grant elements, but it's still very complicated. There must be 50 or 60 discrete elements, either narrative segments that are 3,000 or 6,000 characters max, or letters like the bank letter of credit, audited financials, pro forma projections for project sustainability, budgets. It's a lot of pieces. And I've had to make tools, and I now have kind of a dashboard, yellow-green dashboard for my 3 projects where we're tracking it. I did want to expand a little on the structure of the scoring that Sarah started to talk about a bit. It is somewhat unique in my experience because you have an eligibility review. Is your application complete and good enough to be assigned reviewers for a deep dive? There's a merit review with a 100-point scale. If you get 80 or more points out of that, you then go to a programmatic review based on the threshold of points. They may have some cutoff there, but I call that the bonus round because there are 8 factors that can each get you up to 10% on top of your score. So the maximum score is really 180 points. And the programmatic review is something I hadn't experienced before that bonus round. Sarah mentioned the matching percentage, and it turns out of your 100-point scale, 15 points is designated, dedicated to how much match you're willing to put in, combination of cash and in kind. So at the minimum, 30%, you only get 5 points. At 41%, you get 10. At 50 plus $1, the way I'm interpreting the numbers, you get the 15 points. So if you're coming in with only a 30% match, you're going to lose 10 points off the bat. And under 80 points, you're basically dead in the water. So, you know, having to have interesting conversations with clients that I'm working on these 3 proposals for, you know, what level they're willing to step up, how much skin in the game to help increase their odds. And there's that kind of conversation, which isn't, again, something I was used to in other programs. So a unique element there. And the office hours have been great. And out of them, a couple of weeks ago, Sarah had a special breakout meeting to talk about in-kind and issue I, and then others had been raising in office hours. Maybe in the Q&A I can dive into that, but there is some interesting aspects to middle mile in-kind where people with existing middle mile that is not open access may be able to declare a fair market value for bringing some of their legacy fiber to a middle mile open access criteria in conjunction with the fiber they're going to build. And so 2 of the 3 grants I'm working on, proposals, are going to value existing fiber, not currently open access, as a part of an in-kind contribution. Very interesting and difficult. NTIA has been unable to offer specific guidance on that model. We hear from Sarah, you know, reasonableness, and don't sandbag us, especially when it comes to people that may want to declare that they can build in 2 years rather than 3, 4, or 5 years. That's a special break point under which there may be a couple of those 100 points. And then I'll just finally say, sometimes it's a single word you struggle with. The word perpetuity has proved nettlesome in these conversations, because if you declare for open access middle mile, your interconnect policy, which has to be public, uses the word perpetuity. And what does that mean? Does that mean 1,000-year network? Does it mean, you know, the engineering life, you know, and depreciation cycle? It's not really clear. There's a little wiggle room in the documents that where technically feasible, but then it goes on to talk about capacity and not other technical feasibility like obsolescence. And so I have at least 2 of the 3 projects concerns about use of the word and what the wiggle room should be in declaring that you will offer a network in perpetuity. So sometimes it's as, you know, there's a lot of complex pieces, but sometimes also it's just a word like that where the definition or the way you use it or couch it is critical to the whole middle mile concept and the goals of NTIA and having networks available long term. So let me pause there and let you lead us into Q&A.
Well, thank you very much for being willing to come on and talk a little bit about this role and the role that you're playing as you consider putting an application, as you mentioned, three different applications together for middle mile. We have some questions. I want to encourage more questions of our guests, and let's start with the first one. This is from Michael Shear. He says, given the infancy of many state broadband government offices and the lack of broadband knowledge at the local level, how are we to expect that the current middle mile proposers are focused not just on catching up with long needed basic internet connectivity, but also on the future needs of these networks in terms of intelligent infrastructure? Great question. Sarah, let's let you take that one first.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael, for the question also. I think that you're absolutely right. There are some states who are well developed with their state broadband offices, and others who are there's never been the time or the resources to be able to do something like this. So one of the things that we're looking for, earlier I mentioned that part of the application is talking about the experience that you've got undertaking a project of similar scope and size. We're going to be leaning into that to you as the experts who have done something like this, to show us this is based on what I know and what I've seen. This is what I would build. So I think we also ask that you at least notify the state of your plan. And the reason is not to make it heavy-handed and force anybody to accept your proposals or anything like that. It's more you and your experience building networks. Of course, you would notify towns that you're going through, the state that you're going through. You're eventually going to be pulling permits or asking for pole attachments or whatever the case might be, buying land. So we're just asking that you notify the states also. So it is going to be a very ongoing collaborative approach to undertaking this need, this goal, this mission, that at the end of all of this, that all of us, our neighbors, our kids, our people in far remote places, that all of us have access and are using high-speed and affordable internet. So it's I'm not sure, Michael, if I really answered your question, except to say that in the middle mile program, we do ask if you're coordinating with the states to make them aware of your project, and we do lean into the expertise, the experience that you've got. We're looking for you to demonstrate that.
Mark, what are your thoughts on this point? Because I know you've obviously, as you mentioned, we've interacted when I was the head of the broadband office for the state of Illinois. Right. We worked very collaboratively with a variety of projects, middle mile, including last mile. So what are your thoughts on Michael's question?
Yeah, a couple of things there. Yes, we are bound to consult with the state broadband director in the office. I believe the language is that we seek to have them verify that our projects are consistent with the state broadband plan, which in at least one of my cases, there is not yet a state broadband plan. So that's a little bit of a dance around. But further than that, we do seek a formal letter, that letter go to the support. But I don't believe that really is like a balanced portfolio play, because the state broadband director may have a state project. Some of them do. They may have 1, 2, 3, or 4 projects emerging within the state. Are those the most daunting and challenging and useful potential middle mile opportunities? Not necessarily. They're going to arise from people perceiving the program, its value, their capability to go after it there. But there's no ask of the state broadband director to kind of gauge whether one program is more consistent or more needed or anything there. But definitely engage. We also reach out to the legislators, the state Senate and representatives that are covering those areas to inform them, to ask them if they want dialogue. Of course, we're down at the community level talking to people, but at the state level, we also are going in most cases to the Department of Health and Human Services and Department of Education as two core application areas, telehealth and remote education, to inform and seek their support if they're willing to do that. But there was a component of the question about intelligent infrastructure, and I'm not sure I know how to answer that part. I mean, you know, people are designing networks around what we would call dense wave division multiplexing. So many of these networks could, as an open access middle mile, provide an actual dark fiber pair. Some would have the capacity, others may not. And that doesn't necessarily have to be in their model, but they could provide dark fiber for people to provision and light. They could provide lambdas of provision service on their own fiber. They can provide a backhaul to tier 1, right? And so there's at least 3 ways that any applicant, you know, who gets awarded could be offering, and many of them may offer all 3 of those ways, but perhaps that helps go to the intelligent infrastructure, is the variety in connection capabilities between those 3 methodologies.
Where the questions are beginning to come in, please keep them coming, and I'll move on through them. But just quick note on this is obviously the difference between the role of the state broadband officers in the middle mile program and in the BEAD program, in that in the BEAD program, they will actually be responsible, or a key player in the state that's responsible for making the award decisions. In the middle mile, by contrast, it's NTIA that's making those decisions as on the basis that will be laid out by March 1st. So let's roll to the next question we've got here from William Finney. If we are part of a partnership or partnerships of local governments, do we need to provide letters of credit for each political subdivision, or one letter as a group? Detailed question for Sarah.
William, that's a great question. Thank you for asking about it. The NOFO does require that you're an eligible entity, and that's all explained in the NOFO. And an eligible entity is also a partnership of any of these eligible entities. And that partnership, William, can be an informal partnership where, like, say, for example, a town and a nonprofit decide that they want to come together and create a proposal. Then in that kind of an informal partnership, there's probably going to be some legal contract between that nonprofit and the town to say who owns what assets, or what all of the terms of that partnership really mean. In that example of the informal, there will be one applicant who is deemed the primary applicant, and that's the entity who is required to provide the letter of credit. On the other hand, there will be cases where there are formal partnerships that are created, like a couple of ISPs might come together, for example, and create a new LLC. And they're understanding that we do understand, like, for example, the audited financials will not be available for that new LLC because it's never existed. In that case, we do recommend that the partners, the eligible entities who made up this formal LLC, would provide their audited and historic financials based on the business they have been doing. So just to repeat, in the partnership, if it's an informal, then there will be one primary applicant who is responsible for making sure the letter of credit, the financial attestations are all provided. It's also recommended that when it comes to providing the audited and historic financials, in that case, that your subrecipient partners also provide that. Not a requirement, it's just a recommendation. What we're trying to do is we're asking you to demonstrate the financial capability of this partnership.
William does have a follow-up here. Let me go ahead and ask it. If it's an informal partnership, will we need to share the contract that stipulates who owns what assets?
Well, William, it is something that we do ask, is who is going to own the assets in the end. So that is, I think, a time when if there were a contract like that, it would be a good, that's where you would want to talk about it.
Okay, we have another question from Aneda Lee. Will the new federal program officers be able to consult with the states for NTIA on this middle mile grant? I wonder if that means on behalf of NTIA, or could you just speak to this issue of the federal program officers that NTIA, I mean, you've basically staffed up and you now have, as I understand it, Sarah, one or more program officers in every state. So what is their role in the middle mile, as well as, of course, the BEAD program that they're working very closely with the state officers?
You're right, Drew. The when the Infrastructure Act passed and there was billions of dollars that NTIA was, it was decided that we would allocate 42.45 for BEAD and $1 billion for middle mile, and then we've also got some $2 billion more for the tribal program, and then there's about $2.5 or $2.75 billion for digital equity. We did ramp up tremendously to hire federal program officers in each state and territory, and I think that we were actually all out in DC last week doing this new Broadband Academy. It was a chance to hear about all the programs and to collaborate and make introductions, because while that federal program officer for the BEAD program, their primary job is to, I'm not a football person, but to be the quarterback, basically, that this is not the federal government heavy-handed coming down to say, you state of Arizona are going to do this. The federal program officer is going to be that bridge working between the federal government at NTIA in DC, working with the state broadband office, but also going locally to churches, rec centers, local governments, to make sure that once the state of Arizona, for example, is allocated their allotment for the BEAD program, that everybody's plans, that everybody's needs are being accounted for. All to say, with the middle mile program, those BEAD FPOs are not working with me directly. What they are doing, though, like just yesterday, I had a conversation, our federal program officer in the state of Missouri reached out because as she's making her own introductions to local municipalities and stakeholders, she's finding that there are eligible entities who are interested in applying for the middle mile program. So we're making bridges that way. The BEAD federal program officers are making introductions so that we can help answer questions that eligible entities might have about the middle mile program.
We have a question. Okay,
Drew, if I may on that, just want to talk not as much about the state officers individually on this program, but the flexibility I've heard in conversations with Sarah and her team about consultation later in the grant process. In my experience, an entity like USDA has been very unforgiving about allowing you to cure something, even minor things sometimes in their applications. And if they don't like something towards the end, you may just get cut. But what I've heard from Sarah is that there will be discussions about, there will be probably more flexibility in curing minor stuff than we've seen in some federal programs. But at the end of process, there will really be discussions and indeed perhaps negotiations to reach an accommodation, let's say on the in-kind issue that for me has been nettlesome, or other factors about how you positioned or valued or priced things. There will be conversations and negotiations possible, and that's not always a thing in grant applications.
So, please, if you want to add something.
Well, Mark, thank you for saying that. It probably was not about the BEAD FPOs particularly or specifically, but you raise an excellent point that there are 3 stages of review that are described in the Notice of Funding Opportunity for the Middle Mile Program. And so applications will close September 30th at 11:59 p.m. Eastern. And then we will go into the initial review. In that initial review, we're checking for, we want to make sure that you're an eligible entity, because sometimes it's unclear to people and they apply when they shouldn't have. So we have to notify some people that they were not eligible to apply. We also make sure that your application is complete. And I'll say that it is a big application intake system that has been built, and it is impossible to submit something that is not completed. It doesn't, but so what we'll be checking for in initial is maybe you accidentally uploaded a picture of your cat instead of your resumes of key personnel or something like that. So in initial, we've got a list of many items that the initial reviewers are going to be looking for. To your point, Mark, we're going to gather up this list and say, here's where you were, based on what has been provided, here's where you are deficient. And that list, that it's called curing, that's going to go to the person who you designate on your standard form 424 as your AOR. That's the person at the end of the 424. I think it's authorized organizational representative, if I'm remembering correctly. The person who is your AOR is going to get the list of deficiencies, and they have 7 calendar days to respond to this. And it has to be complete, and there will be no extensions on that. So you do want to make sure that your person who is the AOR is somebody who reads their emails, that this doesn't go to spam. Be extra sensitive during the early part of October to look for these things. And then Mark, then after initial, it goes to merit. Our merit reviewers are independent reviewers who will not be communicating with you because they're trying to look at your application objectively. How do you serve this level of need? How are you able to, if you're claiming you're going to have this done in 2 years, how are you going to be able to do that? If you claim that you're doing 45% match, how are you doing that? Where does that come from? So the merit reviewers will not be in communication with you. Then those applications who score an average of 80 and meet 2 of the 5 statutory criteria will be prioritized into programmatic. And that's where you want to look at the 8 weighting factors that we describe in the programmatic. Those are Mark, that's what you were talking about, is something new, the differentiators, distinguishers, whatever you want to call it. So say, for example, you had an average score of 100 out of merit, then this is your chance in programmatic. If you hit all 8 of those, if you hit 6 of those, then all of a sudden your score is just bubbling up to the top. So, and in that programmatic phase, there might be some points where we as the programmatic reviewers are reaching out to you, not to cure per se, but to substantiate some of the claims that are being made in your application. So it is a very, that's why we can't make recommendations like a lot sooner, is because it is a very collaborative back and forth, to your point, Mark.
And just to repeat that this is why NTIA is doing these office hours, right? You've done 6 of them. You're going to do 6 more of them. So for those who are watching or have further questions, you can certainly go and talk to Sarah and others on our team. We have several more questions, so I want to keep going through them. I'm going to pair up 2 on fiber, and I would venture to say, even though you do say it's technology neutral, all or nearly all of these applications are going to be fiber as middle mile applications. Here's one question that we got from Daniel Smith: any reference costs per mile or per strand of fiber? So that's one question on fiber. And another is from Daniel Smith: is underground fiber favored, and how is it favored in underground, that is to say, as opposed to above ground aerial fiber? And I assume that would tie into several dimensions, including climate resiliency and the like. So Sarah, let's let you address those 2 fiber questions.
Thank you. We do not provide any reference cost per mile of fiber or per strand of fiber. We will be evaluating the budget that you're providing to make sure that the costs are reasonable. So I can only say that much about the cost part of it. As far as any preference on underground or aerial, I can't comment specifically on that either. because it is a competitive program. But just like Drew said, there's many different things that come into account when you're looking at underground or aerial, such as the climate resilience, the impact to the environment. Is this the timeline where this would be, how quickly this could be deployed? Is this using existing conduit? Is this all brand new? There's permitting. So there's the cost factor part of it. So there's a lot. I can't comment on what would be preferred, but there are a lot of different considerations that come into play there. Mark, do you have anything that you want to?
Yeah, I just want to say, especially for ILECs, that have, and even electric companies that have command and control fiber, or ILECs that have any sort of infrastructure that are adding fiber, overlashing is a term we use, where you have aerial fiber or aerial wiring of any kind. That's incredibly less expensive than fiber burial, less environmental impact, but less resiliency when you're done from storms and other matters. So I don't believe the resiliency is scored specifically in the grant application. It's a necessary component to explain satisfactorily, but you're always going to have a balancing act between time to market. Aerial is quicker, it's cheaper. And if you have that opportunity, I see most people taking the opportunity to go aerial for parts of their network deployment. Not everyone will. A lot of these programs will be fresh underground fiber builds, but I just wanted to clarify that there are many situations where overlashing on existing rights to aerial, assets, poles, or electrical grid is common, and I would expect to see plenty of.
We have a question from Bruce Wolf. There is a movement in bank mergers, and more recently, and more significant recently, Community Reinvestment Act contributions and funds must be provided along with a formal community benefits agreement, which has been overlooked in the past. As a significant source of required contributions by law, can NTA seek policy changes to make these funds required and available under the CRA? So kind of maybe a little broader question that's being asked here. Sarah, do you see any applicability in the Community Reinvestment Act and the Middle Mile program, if any?
To be honest, Drew, I don't know that I can comment particularly on the Community Reinvestment Act. I will say that the proposed use of community benefit agreements is something, when we talked about the 8 weighting criteria in the programmatic, that we will be looking for in programmatic is the applicant's proposal of community benefit agreements. That is one of the factors.
Mm-hmm.
And I've looked at CRAs in the past, and I believe they're more likely to play a role in the last mile projects yet to come, Drew. The state competitive projects from the Treasury Capital Project Fund, which will be a first wave. We really haven't been discussing as much. All eyes are on the 42 billion BEAD money, but there's 10 million in Treasury that will come into play much, much sooner. So CRAs could well be beneficial, but I don't see them timely enough to say we'll give you $10 million towards this middle mile fiber project or help you with your match. I more see them playing into last mile projects down the road.
Let's focus for these last few minutes on this question of match and contributions, including in-kind contributions. Sarah, you noted that there's this 30% requirement for a match unless there's a waiver by a small subset of people who are able to apply for it. Could you just speak to what counts as match? And what I'm particularly asking is, and again, I'm sure this is spelled out in some detail in the Notice of Funding Opportunity, NOFO, but could you summarize for us what counts as match? Cash, in kind, what's the kind of level of controversy or uncertainty that was referred to earlier by Mark in terms of some aspects of in kind? But I mean, clearly there are some areas that are not uncertain. That is to say, an in-kind contribution can go towards some percentage of match, can it not, Sarah?
Yes, that's correct. I mean, of course, you can always use cash. That's one option, but the in-kind, and I'll let Mark talk to the conversation that we were having on the in-kind side of it. It can be it could be assets that could be used for this middle mile project. It might be it might be your employee services. It might be lawyers who want to do pro bono work. It might be anything that is in support of this project that is, I mean, it might be material. I think that that's a point worth making, understanding that supply chain issues are real. It takes, if you're looking at fiber, for example, it might take, I'm hearing 18 to 24 months to get fiber for a project. So there are applicants who have asked, could we provide material like fiber, for example, as an in-kind contribution? And I want to make sure everybody understands anything that you provide pre-award is really at your own risk. I think that everybody knows that, but we're not trying to encourage people to go ahead and spend money when they don't even know if they won. That said, if providing this material before the award is something that you would like to do, you are able to do that. That would only qualify as an in-kind contribution in that fiber example, or if it's equipment or whatever it is, in-kind contribution only. You will not be reimbursed for something like that. It would only be an in-kind contribution match. The other question that we get pretty regularly is sometimes if a state wants to provide some kind of cash match, for example, or anybody for that matter, maybe the legislation's not in session, or maybe it's moving money around. I have no idea. But what kind of evidence, what kind of documentation do we need? And the answer to that is we need to know where the money's coming from. We need to be able to tie it back to something. If it's with hopefully you would be able to describe this in the budget narrative, but we need more than just hey, our governor said he or she would give us $20 million for this project. We need the details. I mean, this is like building a business case, and in order to make and so that we're going to be evaluating the application based on the data, based on the facts that have been demonstrated.
Mark, if I may give you a simple example that I believe will be common. Let's say I have existing communication huts, facilities, and I'm now routing new middle mile open access fiber through them and terminating in them. Then it wouldn't be inappropriate to charge myself basically a fair market value for co-location in existing facilities. How much would a commercial provider charge for a rack or a cage? And even though I may have my sunk costs in that facility, I can allocate a fair market value for the portion of use or what the market would bear for that use. So that would be almost to me a simple example in that regard.
I'm going to give each of you a chance to offer closing comments, but I do want to get this last question from Alyssa Matthews. As a state entity applicant, can a letter from our administration committing match from the state's surplus budget be used to show match until actual appropriations are finalized by the legislature during the next session over the winter? So, specific question. Don't know if you have an answer for that one right now, Sarah.
Alyssa, I can't comment specifically. All I can say is that we are looking for facts. One of the reasons that we created the application, and I know that it's complex, but one of the reasons that we did it the way we did is because we are looking for data. We're looking for facts as much as we can quantify where, how, when this is happening. Those are the kinds of facts that we will be looking for.
But the use of federal, if it was federal funds left over from
Yes.
ARPA, are those applicable?
No, thank you for catching that, Mark. There is, unless there is unless the federal fund expresses directly that their funds might be used for match, there is no federal funding that is allowed to be used for match in this program. That includes ARPA, those funds, those surplus funds may not be used to be the match basis for this program.
We'll give 30 seconds for Mark and then for Sarah to offer some closing thoughts on anything you'd like people to be aware of as we go to the 23 days until the project is due.
I like your countdown clock, and I'm definitely uploading a picture of my cat now that it's been suggested as a benefit. It's just it's terribly complicated. I describe it as a multi-state challenging scavenger hunt as you work to get these 50 or 60 elements. So this is not for everyone. This is not for a small community with that's not willing to hire in or have substantial economic development staff that can manage grants. My hope is that the state competitive grants are much less challenging than this level of federal grant and much broader in their engagement. So I expect Sarah's program, this particular program, to be 5x or more oversubscribed. So it's going to be very competitive coming down. And, there's no way of telling, but just based on what we've seen on tribal and some other programs of this scale, NTIA infrastructure. So it's challenging. It's exciting for me to be doing 3 at once. I get a lot of synergy between them, but it's also making me a bit nervous as those 23 days count down. So good luck to all.
Sarah, some final thoughts from you at NTIA.
Thank you, Drew. Just a reminder, 23 days, end of the day, 11:59 Eastern on September 30th. There will not be any extensions. We are here at NTIA to make this happen, and it's going to take all of us. It's going to take states, local municipalities. It's going to take wired, wireless. It's going to take churches, nonprofits. It's going to take for-profit corporations. It's going to take all of us in order to make this happen. And looking at that diverse pool of applicants, that's why we're doing these office hours, is to talk about some of these questions. Mark's right. It is complex. It is a lot that we're asking for. But if you think that you have a level of need and you're committed to getting an application in and you're an eligible entity and you're able to meet the requirements, please join our office hours. And as much as we can answer your questions about what these questions are, we will.
Well, thank you again on behalf of our 2 great panelists, Sarah Bleau and Mark Goldstein. I'm Drew Clark with Broadband Breakfast. See you next Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern Time. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thanks.